Zettel für die lange Weg. 2 Flaschen Whisky für die Zeit. Und ich date gern habe, du bist dabei. Maria, geht fahrt mal weg, ist weit. Wann ich geh, ich werd dir fehlen, wann ich geh. Du sehst nicht, was ich mach, du sehst nicht, wie ich lach. Ich werd dir fehlen, du watsch sehen. Hab kriegt mein Zettel für den langen Weg. Du scheinst da, als mir finden kann. Es hat Maria und Dale ganz wunderbar. Hass ich dir den weißen Dank. Wann ich geh, ich werd dir fehlen, wann ich geh. Du sehst nicht, was ich mach, du sehst nicht, wie ich lach. Ich werd dir fehlen, du watch sehen. Well, Gouda Ovid, Liebe Light, and welcome back to another episode of PA Dutch Live. We are now to our November edition. Holy cow. As my grandfather would say, the year's almost rond. And, well, it sure is, as we're getting ready to approach December. And, oh, my goodness, but we got Thanksgiving coming up. If this is your first time joining us, welcome, as we say in Pennsylvania. If this is your 36th time joining us, I say welcome to you as well. And, boy, do we have a wonderful show coming at you tonight, full of just some, I'm going to use the word wunderbar a lot tonight because I'm so excited to bring you tonight's episode for a lot of reasons. But we start every episode the same way, and I see a lot of people, holy cow, the comments are flying in. If you are joining us on Facebook or if you are joining us on the YouTube channel, please type in the comment section where you're joining us from, and we'll give you some shout outs. We got a lot of people here already throwing comments at us. We got our good friend Don Moyer joining us. Ich wohne in Midlothian, Virginia. Hey, Don, good to have you as you join us every month. Jennifer P, hello, everyone. Don't know where Jennifer's joining us from. Titus Keller, Pennsylvania Dutch from Buffalo Springs, Lebanon County, now living in Michigan. Midwest represented already early this evening. Randy Howard is, hey, from Texas. We got Texas represented. Our good friend Brigitte is joining us from Philly. We're going to be seeing more of Brigitte a little bit later on the show. That's a teaser for you guys. Our good friend Norman Jung, Gute Maria aus Steinbach am Glan in Germany, staying up after midnight. Once again, Norman, thank you for joining us as you do every month. My dear friend and distant cousin Carol Cantner, good evening from beautiful but chilly downtown Burnville. I saw Carol on Sunday. It was so good to see you, my friend, and it's great to have you joining us again this month. Our good friend Gary joins us almost every month as well from Egypt, Pennsylvania, that is. Christian Deems, hi from PA. Hey, Christian, thanks for joining the stream tonight. Bill aus Dillsburg, Gouda Ovid aus Yarrick Condi. We got Yarrick Condi represented now too, all over the map tonight. We have our good friend Dolly Moyer. She joins us every month. Hello from Fleetwood in beautiful Berks County, Pennsylvania. And we're going to stay in Fleetwood. Our good friend Rachel and the whole Wiswasser family there. Hello from Fleetwood as well. We got Dell joining us from Fort Smith, Arkansas. Well, I don't know. That's great. Another state representative. Pete Gustafson Music. We're going to see a little bit more of him later, joining us from Quakertown there in Bucks County. And also Hunter O'Neill. Hey, Doug, representing 23113 Midlothian, Virginia. OTW to Tennessee, on the way to Tennessee. Well, guys, it's so great. If you're just joining us, of course, throw that comment in the comment section so we can give you a shout out. Like John Shaw just said, Nashville made it at the end. Hey, thanks for joining us there in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. Well, people, let's jump right into it. I've been advertising this episode, of course, on the social media feeds. Most of you have heard. Our guest tonight is top notch, and we're going to get to him here in a little bit. We do have some stuff to take care of first, but tonight we're going to welcome Dr. Mark Louden on the show, someone that I'll save all the introductions for when it's time to bring him in, but it's going to be a great show tonight. First off, for those of you that are in the southeastern Pennsylvania region, of course, we heard some news today that a lot of us are having a hard time understanding and accepting. I felt it was my duty to at least address this tonight and talk a little bit about it. If you had not heard, I hate to be the person to break this to you, but the people that run the Kutztown Folk Festival today put out a press release at some point early or late morning, I should say, here on the East Coast, announcing that due to economic constraints and a dwindling attendance over the last couple of years, that they have decided to cancel the 2025 edition of the Kutztown Folk Festival. For most of us, this has been something that we have grown up with, that's been around our whole lives. 2025 would have been the 75th edition of the Kutztown Folk Festival, the oldest and longest running folk life festival in the United States. It is sad news, of course, for a lot of us. There's a lot of anger. I was reading too much on social media today, comments of people trying to understand, why is this happening? It seems so abrupt. I was not involved in that decision-making process. I have been involved with the folk festival for many years now on the entertainment stage, and some of the seminar stuff, but I was not in the decision-making process for this. I just want to let everybody know. But I am sad to report that at this point, unless somebody steps up and takes over the festival, it most likely, well, it won't be happening in 2025, and probably will not happen in the future either at any point down the road. So they still have a social media presence. You can read the full press release online. Local media in southeastern Pennsylvania, the Allentown television station and Reading News, of course, is also covering this story. It comes as a blow for sure. A lot of people plan their vacations around the Kutztown Folk Festival. And I'm just hoping that some of the other smaller Pennsylvania Dutch festivals that are out there, and there are many, and other opportunities for us to learn and experience the Pennsylvania Dutch culture, that they will get our attention now more. And hopefully, if you can't go to Kutztown in July this coming year, maybe you can go down to the Goshenhappens and experience their festival, which is a top-notch festival as well. I will keep you guys up to date, of course, of any other upcoming festivals, as I do all the time on my social media feeds. And if there would be any other news in regards to the Kutztown Folk Festival, I will definitely let you guys know through my social media channels. We'll turn the page on the sad news and let's get to some good news. Tonight's episode is brought to us by the good people at the Central Berks Fire Company, number 1, Company 38 in beautiful downtown Centerport, Pennsylvania. They have been around for a very long time. Good people running that fire company. And they also have a social quarters if you ever wanted to rent it out for a private party or a wedding reception. So I just wanted to give a shout out to this month's episode brought to us by the Central Berks Fire Company in Centerport, Pennsylvania. Now, get your Pennsylvania Dutch calendars out, people. We got some great events for you to mark down. First and foremost, this Saturday, November 23rd, is the annual. This time it's the 33rd, the 33 Ole Dahl Versamling there in beautiful Ole at the Ole Valley Fair Center. This is a wonderful Versamling. If you've never been to a Versamling, it's a great one to go to. You don't have to understand Pennsylvania Dutch to go to this and enjoy the experience. Of course, if you know a little bit of Pennsylvania Dutch, you'll probably enjoy it a little bit more, but it is not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination. You will have a great meal and great entertainment. I'll talk more about the entertainment at this year's Versamling here a little bit towards the end of the show, but you can still get tickets. You can check out their Facebook page, but also I have the phone number there if you wanted to call or email Tom Stokes, who was on the show before. He's kind of in charge of the Versamling there, but it is a great opportunity for your calendars. A couple other people have joined in real quick. Let's give them a shout out. Our good friend Christopher Malone joining us from Trapp there in Montgomery County. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Kitty Moyer is joining us from Midlothian, Virginia as well. Boy, Midlothian is well represented tonight. Peter Toad, gute Grüße. Leider verstehe ich dein Englisch besser als dein Pfälzisch. Okay, he understands. Unfortunately, he understands English better than Pfälzisch. Okay, and Chuck R is joining us. All aboard for Centerport. Hey, all right. Another event for your Pennsylvania Dutch calendars is the historic Ephrata Cloisters Christmas at the Cloister on Monday and Tuesday, December 9th and 10th. Mark your calendars. Tons of stuff there. You can check out more information on their website and also on their social media feeds. Another Christmas market for you to check out is the Goshenhappens, who we mentioned earlier. The Goshenhappen historians will be having their Christmas market that same weekend, the 7th and the 8th of December, there in Green Lane, Pennsylvania. Another great opportunity for you to go check out some really cool Pennsylvania themed stuff. And another thing for your calendars is the annual Christmas on the Farm at the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center at Kutztown University, run by our good friend Patrick Dunmoyer. That event will be taking place that same weekend on December 7th from 11 to 4. That is a free event. No park. You don't have to pay to park. You don't have to pay to get in. There will be entertainment. There will be a visit from the Belschnigel. There will also be food opportunities, and you can tour the whole grounds there. If you've never been to the Cultural Heritage Center there at Kutztown, I highly recommend it. It's a great event. Hopefully the weather will behave. So you could make that whole weekend your Pennsylvania Dutch weekend. You can stop at Goshenhoppen. You can check out the Christmas on the Farm in Kutztown. And then on Monday, you can drive over to Ephrata and check out their event as well. Also, while we're speaking of calendars, the annual 2025 Pennsylvania Dutch calendar is now out and available from Masthof Press. Mir leben und schaffe auf der Bauerei is this year's theme. We live and work on the farm, full of Pennsylvania Dutch folk art. It's a really nice calendar to have hanging in your house, of course, and it is put out by the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center at Kutztown, but you can get it at Masthof Press. Finally, one last thing for your calendar, and that is the Lower Paxton Chris Kindle Mark in just outside of Lingelstown, not too far outside of Harrisburg. That is the weekend after all of those other events on the 14th. You can check that out. I will be there. I am the MC for the entertainment stage that day. I'm looking forward to seeing lots of people and talking about great German Christmas traditions. Maybe not so much Pennsylvania Dutch, but more German Christmas traditions. It'll be a really nice event as long as the weather holds out. Next Thursday, of course, is Thanksgiving. So there are a couple ways of saying Happy Thanksgiving in Pennsylvania Dutch. One way, Heiliges Dankfest. There's other terms too, depending on regional differences and so forth. I'm sure our guest tonight can enlighten us about those types of topics. But there's just a little bit of Pennsylvania Dutch for you to practice this week. And also, every month we do a hee-haw style salute to some town in the greater Pennsylvania Dutch area community, and this month we go to Lancaster County and a salute to the town of Elizabethtown, of course, where Elizabethtown College is located. It's a really great little town, founded in 1753, and the latest I could find was a current population of around 11,639 people. So salute to the good people in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Without further ado, everybody, I've been trying to get this guy, and it's not his fault. I've been trying to get Mark Louden as a guest on my show since we started this show 3 years ago, and schedule's been difficult, and he has a very busy schedule, and of course, I have a busy schedule, but we were finally able to make it work out, and I'm so happy that he has agreed to come on. Many of you probably are aware of who Mark is. Maybe you have his book. We'll talk about that tonight, but Mark Louden, for those of you who don't know, is a professor of German, doctor of German at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we're going to bring him on here in a minute. He's going to be talking about Pennsylvania Dutch, an American language. He is the author of the book Pennsylvania Dutch, The Story of an American Language. If you don't have this in your Pennsylvania Dutch library, people, ask the Belschnickel to bring it for you, because this is a book that I think all Pennsylvania Dutch people should read at some point. So without further ado, I bragged him up enough. It's time to bring Mark in. Dr. Louden, Mark, welcome to PA Dutch Live.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Doug. It's great to be here and to see so many nice visitors joining us too. It's great.
From all over the place, right, Mark? This is great. I always start the same way so people can kind of get to know you a little better. I introduced you. You're a professor of German at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but you're this expert on Pennsylvania Dutch. How did you ever get involved or interested in Pennsylvania Dutch? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not from Pennsylvania.
That's correct. I am not from Pennsylvania, but next February will be 40 years ago that I started attending Amish and older Mennonite church services. So my sort of entree into the Pennsylvania Dutch world was actually through church. And so it was in February 1985 that I first attended an older Amish worship service. I was in college, actually in graduate school in upstate New York. So I was in the Finger Lakes at that time. And I had German since, in school already, since 7th grade. I had studied abroad in Germany during my undergraduate year for an entire year. So, I knew German. I was getting a PhD in German linguistics, so I was, had German, standard German down. But when I remember very distinctly the first time that I was at this Amish worship service, after the service was over, and it lasts about 3 hours or so, when people would chat with me, they would not switch to English, even though all the adults speak English. If they just assumed that I would understand, and I understood a fair amount. And so if there was something that I didn't understand, they would just simply rephrase it in Pennsylvania Dutch. And so I learned by immersion. And then about 6 months later, I met some older Mennonites, and then really got involved with that community, the Penyan community, started quote unquote running around with their young people. It's not what people think or the general public thinks. Rumspringen is not anything like that. But in any case, so I was attending church there, hanging out with the young people. And then for 2 years, I taught singing school, which is kind of an old Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. It's also specifically an older Mennonite tradition where young people in the summertime get together on Saturday nights and practice singing and socialize with one another. And so I taught that in Pennsylvania Dutch for a couple of years. And then I've gotten more and more deeply involved in the various, mostly plain communities. I'm a baptized Mennonite now for several years and attend Madison Mennonite Church and do a lot of activity involving Pennsylvania Dutch that we can talk about this evening.
Yeah, I definitely towards the end I want to talk about what you're currently doing, 'cause I think it's such a fascinating story as well. But we have to talk about your research. And the great thing I like about Mark is that he's able to take these very, linguistics isn't the easiest thing for the average person to kind of wrap their head around. But Mark has a great ability to talk to us, the normal person that maybe doesn't understand all the scientific jargon, and get us to understand what he has learned through his years and years of study of the language. But you published this book, Pennsylvania Dutch, the story of an American language. The first question I have to ask you, because I get asked it a lot, and it's one of these common myths or these stories that have been told, but you chose the term Pennsylvania Dutch, and there's always been this struggle, this fight, this argument between, is it Pennsylvania Dutch, is it Pennsylvania German? From your perspective, when someone asks you that, how do you respond to that person?
That's an excellent question, and it's a question that I get all the time. So the first thing is, if I were, showing PowerPoint, I had a PowerPoint presentation, I would share a screenshot from the Oxford English Dictionary under the adjective Dutch. And the definition is German, of or pertaining to the people and language of Germany. So in the 18th century and continuing into the 19th century and even somewhat later, but definitely before that, the word Dutch was used in the English language, and we're talking about originally in the British Isles, then brought over to colonial America. The term Dutch was the English word to describe anything that was spoken on the continent of Europe, south of Scandinavia, that was Germanic. So then, Brits were not necessarily great about sort of, fine distinctions of geography and different languages and cultures and that sort of thing. So they basically just referred to what we would call sort of Northwestern and Central Europe, which was heavily Germanic, as basically Dutch speaking. In the North, it was known as Low Dutch, which is now what we understand as Low German, and Holland Dutch, Netherlandic, right? And the low comes from just simply the landscape. That's where it comes from. And then as you go farther south, eventually to a place like Switzerland, where the altitude is quite different than in the north, that is High Dutch. And the word German in English is actually a borrowing from Latin. Now, yes, it does have a Germanic origin, but it was basically the Romans, derived from the Romans' word for the people that they were afraid of that lived north of them. So Germania, Germania, Germanisch, Germanic, these kinds of things. And so the term German entered the English language with lots and lots of other Latinate vocabulary, and always had sort of like a somewhat more kind of higher status, elite sort of sound to it. But Dutch is the original term, and Dutch is not translated from the German Deutsch or Pennsylvania Dutch Deutsch. It is just simply a cousin to those words. And it goes back to a very, very old Germanic word that simply means people.
Great. So everyone, did you hear that now? So you heard it from the expert tonight.
I mean, there's nothing
Okay.
wrong with saying Pennsylvania German in
No.
scholarly contexts because it is a little bit less misleading for folks. But for people to say that it's wrong to say Pennsylvania Dutch, I would take issue with that.
Yeah, and I know that, like, for a lot of us that aren't necessarily running in academic circles, I think about all four of my grandparents. They never ever used the term Pennsylvania German. They were always, well, you're Pennsylvania Dutch, you're Dutch. Let's speak Dutch, and I think maybe I'm partial to that too, because that's what I was raised with and hearing all the time. But we heard the actual definition answer. Thank you so much, Mark. The other term that people struggle with is dialect and language. So to somebody that doesn't understand, explain those two words to us as well, please.
Yeah, even from a linguistic perspective, there is no sort of there are no hard and fast rules to say, okay, this variety of speech is a separate language, and this is a dialect of another language, right? It's a relatively, those labels are somewhat arbitrary. So, for example, what we call two languages, Norwegian and Swedish, are effectively mutually intelligible. People can speak their, a Norwegian and a Swede can speak their native languages and understand one another just fine. Why do we call them two separate languages? We don't call it that, but they do, because Norwegians live in Norway and Swedes live in Sweden. And so they can sort of draw the line that way. Um, for many, many years, the language of the majority population of Luxembourg, the country of Luxembourg, which we refer to as Luxembourgish, the language that was always called a dialect of German, until 1984, when the Luxembourg Parliament basically said, we're our own country, and what we speak does resemble some German dialects that are just right over the border in the Federal Republic of Germany, but we're not Germany, and so we are now going to, declare our native tongue no longer a dialect of German, but a distinct Germanic language. And the subtitle of my book that you showed is The Story of an American Language. And I chose that specifically because, the story of Pennsylvania Dutch, yes, kind of begins in Germany, but it really begins in colonial America. It's an American product. Yes, I often, an image that I give about it, as I say, is that it's an American linguistic machine made with parts imported from Europe, or German-speaking Europe. So you can't go anywhere, even into the Palatinate, and like find a region or a village or something where say, oh, they're speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. In the same way that the language that I'm speaking now, we can't sort of like go to somewhere in southwestern England and say, oh, there's somebody that's talking exactly like Doug and Mark, right? So this is really an American phenomenon, American development. And I regard it as a separate language because it is autonomous from German. It is, a cousin to German, but it's a cousin to a lot of other Germanic languages. But it is not, it's a different kind of relationship to German than, say, like Pfälzisch, Palatine German, the dialects that are closest cousins to Pennsylvania Dutch, are in modern Germany today, because everybody who speaks Pfälzisch also speaks Standard German, right? There's no such thing as like a monolingual Pfälzisch Palatine German speaker. And so there is that kind of, it's in German, they refer to this as what's called an umbrella language or a roof language, Dachsprache, where there is that sort of influence that comes, or the sort of mutual influence or interaction between, say, regional dialects and the standard language that they are connected to. The other language that Pennsylvania Dutch is connected to is English, right? Essentially, there's never been a monolingual Pennsylvania Dutch speaker. Now, there have been plenty of Pennsylvania Dutch speakers who have been much more comfortable using Pennsylvania Dutch and dominant in speaking Pennsylvania Dutch, and feel that English is a second language. But the Pennsylvania Dutch, even going back to the 18th century, have never been so isolated as to have actually no knowledge whatsoever of English. And so English has always been a part of the linguistic mix of Pennsylvania Dutch. And it's, you can't speak Pennsylvania Dutch without knowing English, right? Which is an important little fact to recognize. So again, that sort of moves the needle away from calling it a dialect of German to just simply an American language.
I guess a question, and maybe you can't answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. Is Pennsylvania Dutch unique in the American story in that sense? Are there other examples of cultures or languages that have a similar story to Pennsylvania Dutch?
That's a really good question. I mean, there are other, what we call heritage languages that are, heritage languages fall into two categories: indigenous, spoken by Native Americans, and those that are the product of migration in some sense. Pennsylvania Dutch is somewhat, I would say, sort of Acadian French, Cajun French, share some similarities there, except that the roots of Cajun French go back not directly to France, but to Canada and Acadia, and sort of, in that sort of, eastern French-speaking part of Canada, there's still sort of a connection there. Whereas with Pennsylvania Dutch, it's just spoken in the United States and Canada. And the reason that it's spoken in Canada is that in the late 18th century, there were typically mostly Mennonites who migrated up into what was called Upper Canada. It's now Southern Ontario today. There are, other heritage varieties of immigrant languages that have lasted almost as long as Pennsylvania Dutch. But I'm thinking of like Hutterite German, the language of the Hutterites. Yiddish, as spoken by native speakers of Yiddish in North America, is different from Yiddish varieties elsewhere. But again, Yiddish is also spoken in, like, for example, Europe still today, and Israel. So Pennsylvania Dutch is kind of in its own category, I think, as as a minority language in the United States and Canada.
One question I'd love to ask you, you told us in your backstory that you really came into Pennsylvania contact with Pennsylvania Dutch with the plain within the plain communities, and that was your your introduction. And then I'm sure through your research and through all of your years of work, you eventually came into contact then with those of us down in that southeast corner of Pennsylvania that weren't that aren't descendants of the plain people. What was that? What were your first what were some of your first reactions to meeting non-plain Pennsylvania Dutch speakers? Because, and you can please talk about, there are differences between the languages spoken between the two communities, and also, I mean, there's huge cultural differences and practices and things like that. Can you talk just a little bit about that from your perspective, please?
That's a great question. So, I, for a long time, kind of had the impression that we're talking about sort of really two very, very distinct subgroups in Pennsylvania Dutch culture: the plain and the fancy, or the, the church people and the plain people. There are definitely, as you say, there are definite differences. There are linguistic differences, although all varieties are completely mutually intelligible with one another. It's just like, basically, like, I come from Michigan, you come from Alabama. We recognize that we're from different states, but we understand one another just fine. I mean, there's no breakdown in mutual intelligibility. So it's clearly the same language, but there's some very interesting differences. There are definitely some interesting cultural differences too, really, really fascinating cultural differences. I think the one thing that has really struck me is that because Pennsylvania Dutch, among the people that you're descended from, has been not widely used as truly as a community language, like for a couple of generations now. It's a rather different sort of situation, where it's like you don't have, for example, young families today, where parents are in their 30s or 40s and are completely fluent native speakers of Pennsylvania Dutch that are speaking it with their kids, and that these families are part of a larger community,
Right.
right, where they're all doing the same thing. That's what you get among the plain people, right? They are truly active, speakers of Pennsylvania Dutch. It is their first language, and they also speak English as well. So I think that sort of, kind of difference in the everyday presence, or the everyday activity surrounding Pennsylvania Dutch is kind of striking. But the thing that, and most of my book is devoted to the church Dutch. In other words, not the plain people. It's not a book that focuses only on the Amish and older Mennonite speakers. In fact, there's a chapter on that, but it's really mostly about the folks that you're descended from, who are the kind of main standard bearers of the culture going back to the 18th century. And the thing that struck me by the time that I got to the end of the book was, and this is a product of, at that point, 30 something years of research and sort of involvement, lots and lots of time spent in plain communities and visits to non-sectarian folks in southeastern PA and so forth, and Canada. But the thing that really struck me is that there are some really important commonalities in terms of basic values. And one thing that, if you ask a plain person, it's like, what is the sort of cardinal virtue that you sort of try to live your life, in accordance with? And they would say humility, Demut. And that's something that's obviously connected to their Christian faith and how they put their faith into practice. But humility, I would say, is probably an apt cardinal virtue for all Pennsylvania Dutch. This idea that's like, this is a language of everyday people. This is a language of, for the most part, country folk. This is the language of people who, basically mean what they say what they mean. Their yes means yes and their no means no. De kunst me net verkaufen en Duits, right? There's a kind of integrity that comes not so much with the language itself as with the use of the language. And I've often said that, and this is something that I picked up from Don Yoder as well, the idea from this. Don Yoder was a really, really important figure in Pennsylvania Dutch cultural studies. And, the sort of kind of national symbol, if you will, of the Pennsylvania Dutch is the groundhog, right? We think of groundhog lodges and all kinds of stuff that have to do with the groundhog. And that's about the greatest contrast you can imagine to a living creature with the American bald eagle, right? The
Yeah.
sort of U.S. American bald eagle, where it's like the bald eagle is like soaring through the sky and is kind of has sort of a noble look about it. There's a little bit of kind of aggression that's maybe there and sort of strength and power. And, the groundhog is a rodent, right? Who kind of burrows in the ground. But the groundhog kind of exemplifies folk wisdom, right? Or sort of like innate kind of cleverness and wisdom that does not come from book learning, does not come from formal education, but it comes from practical experience and honesty and integrity. And so, if you really sort of think about kind of humility as a sort of, like, what does that mean? You find so many of expressions of it, both among obviously the plain people, but also among the church folks.
Yeah. From my perspective, as someone descending from those people, I mean, I remember very clearly when I told my grandparents that I was going to be the first person from my family to go to college, and when I told them, they were happy, but they all said, like, right in the same sentence, they said, "Not don't get too big." It's the exact same thing. Go get your degree, but don't get too big. That idea of remember where you're from, remember who
Yep.
you are, and boy, you put it so eloquently, and I'm sure most of the people watching us tonight are nodding their head in agreement. Like, absolutely, it speaks so much about who we are as a people. Just as an aside, as you started to interact more and travel to southeastern Pennsylvania, was there anything that you encountered or experienced among the church Dutch that shocked you or surprised you?
No, not that really shocked or surprised me. I had already had formed some impressions or gained some information about perceptions of what the plain people call Berks County Dutch, right? Even though not all plain or non-sectarian or church people live in Berks County, but many do, and that's adjacent to Lancaster County, so it kind of makes sense. But if you ask sort of your typical sort of Amish or older Mennonite Pennsylvania Dutch speaker from Lancaster, sort of like what their stereotype is of Berks County Dutch, and they say, "Sie kennen really fluchen." Those people can really curse, and there is a kind of use of the language that gets a little bit salty.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes that is less common among the plain people. There's
Sure.
and like at the folk festival that I'm regretting, the news that you shared about whatever. One thing that it is um, an event there that you would not find plain people kind of buying into or participating in is liars contests.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's all for entertainment and it's fun and that sort of thing. It's not any sort of like sinful sort of behavior, but it's just something that's like that sort of like telling tall tales and fish stories. That sort
Yeah.
of thing is just a little bit kind of stretching the truth maybe in some
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
That's something that is I was kind of primed to find in places like Berks County, and I guess it's there a little bit. But I think that what has always sort of kind of fascinated me is you know the amount of literature that was produced by
Mm.
your ancestors. And there are thousands and thousands of really really interesting texts, so pieces of prose, poetry, drama, letters to the editor, that kind of thing, that appeared mostly in regional newspapers in PA throughout the 19th century and then well into the 20th century, that are just absolute gems that say a lot about the culture, but it's also like their perspective on the world, on life, and society at large. And there were almost no Anabaptists producing that literature. And so I just have to really kind of tip my hat or whatever to the fancy Dutch for producing such an incredible amount
Yeah.
of really really interesting written material. I mean, things like barn stars, referred to as hex signs, these kinds of things. A lot of things having to do with folk art. That's something that's overwhelmingly been a fancy Dutch church people kind of endeavor, and I'm very impressed with it.
One thing too, I was wondering about, since most of us joining and most of us that are Pennsylvania Dutch here, of course, are familiar with the plain people here in Pennsylvania. But you're in Wisconsin, and there is a large a plain people population in the Midwest. If somebody from Pennsylvania who maybe speaks a little bit of Pennsylvania Dutch or is used to interacting with Amish and Mennonite here in southeastern Pennsylvania would travel to Wisconsin, for example, or somewhere else there in the Midwest, what kind of things would we notice that might be different from what we're used to here in Pennsylvania?
Great question. So, just talking about the different, what we call sectarian, so that's like Amish and traditional Mennonite, sectarian varieties of Pennsylvania Dutch. The sort of two big varieties are Lancaster and older Amish and older Mennonite Dutch, and Ohio and parts west Amish Pennsylvania Dutch. And there's like one very, very clear shibboleth that sort of basically like a linguistic feature that sort of says, you are from, southeastern PA, or you are from Ohio or somewhere else in the Midwest. And that's the pronunciation of the diphthong I. So like, for example, Deutsch, right? The language. You say, if you're from Lancaster or from a Lancaster affiliated community, you say Deutsch, ich schwätze Deutsch. But if you're from Ohio or from another Midwestern community, you would say Daj, right? So we say it's been turned into a monophthong, which is a, so Daj. So, like, for example, a nice little sort of example of this is to say, three Pennsylvania Dutch women, you say in Pennsylvania, and also they use the American R, the rather than the r, which is the Midwestern and the older Dutch too, Dutch R. So they say, dry Deutsche Weibsleid, right? Three Pennsylvania Dutch women. In the Midwest, you say dry Deutsche Weibsleid. And so, I mean, you recognize it right away as, it's like, oh, I know where you're from, but I have no problems understanding you. Literally an hour or so before we logged on to this show, I was at our children's hospital here in Madison, Wisconsin on campus. Little girl experienced, a toddler, 3-year-old, has some rather serious injury, but things are headed in the right direction. And she is a Schwarzentrooper from a Schwarzentrooper Amish community. The Schwarzentroopers are a very, very highly traditional, or you'd say conservative, group of Amish that are mostly descended from Ohio, but are kind of distributed in other areas. And so, this little girl is Schwarzentrooper Amish, and her, mom and dad were there, and she was being cared for. She had a burn injury, and she's being cared for by a caregiver from an old order Mennonite community who's she's originally from Pennsylvania. So she speaks this Lancaster County Dutch. And I mean, this is in the hospital, but the hospital allows Amish and traditional Mennonite caregivers to come in with a specific form of burn and wound care therapy, which we could spend a whole other show talking about. And what was really interesting is that I was speaking two dialects. I mean, they were each speaking their own dialect, right, and not adapting to one another. But when I talked to Karen, the older Mennonite woman, I'd start saying light. And then it's funny because I use that word too, the word for people. And so I said, like, for example, to the Amish people, I said, I light, right? So you people, and I looked at Karen and I said, on die light, right? And they picked up on it right away because, they are speaking two different dialects, but they don't wrinkle their brow or, chuckle or anything like that. They're just like, oh yeah, well, Karen speaks, Lancaster Dutch, and we speak, kind of an Ohio Dutch. So.
Well, you've mentioned this real quick, and I did want to talk a little about this because you just we've talked before, and I learned this about you recently. Could you briefly tell us a little bit about that, like what you experienced tonight? You've been working with in hospital settings and other settings as well, and utilizing your knowledge of the Pennsylvania Dutch language in certain situations. Could you just briefly tell us about that experience and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I am an officially certified medical interpreter and court interpreter for Pennsylvania Dutch. And the way that this got started, I've been here in Wisconsin going on 25 years. I was 12 years in Texas. It really started when I was living in an Amish community in Texas. I was teaching at the University of Texas at Austin, but I was living down in a community south of there where there was an Amish community at the time called Gonzales. And it was there that I actually started, people would, from the community would ask me, it's like, hey, could you go with me to the school and talk to the school psychologist? My kids got ADHD, and I don't think I don't think we're communicating all that well. And it had really nothing to do with proficiency in English. It just had to do with, like, how do you talk to a school psychologist, right? If you're an Amish person or something. And then very quickly, I started getting called upon to help with medical issues. And plain people, along with lots and lots of other U.S. citizens, go to Mexico for medical care, especially folks who are underinsured or uninsured self-pay patients. And so they would, many plain people go to Mexico for care, both for what they would see as the quality of care and definitely for the cost. And so I actually accompanied people down to Mexico. I drive them down there. And I started learning. This kind of brought me down this sort of journey of like how the U.S. healthcare system works and how plain people navigate it, especially as self-pay patients. And so it was mostly plain people that say, hey, could you come with me and just sort of sit with me at the doctor's? And, I don't know if I'm asking the right questions. I don't know if I'm, if they're understanding me when I'm expressing myself and that sort of thing. And it was really less, I mean, it's interpretation when I'm dealing with little kids, but it's more what I call cultural mediation. And the general term that's used for the work that I do is patient navigation. We have here in Madison, this is where I just came from. We have our university hospital and our children's hospital, which are connected to one another. They are the large tertiary care facility, which means that the highest level of certain specialties, like, we have a burn center, we have a transplant center, that kind of thing. Um, it's the sort of like when things get escalated to a very, very high level. And if you live in the sort of central and western part of Wisconsin, you end up in Madison. If you live in the eastern part, you go to Milwaukee. So those are the two major cities here. Wisconsin is the fourth largest Amish population out of the 32 US states and 3 Canadian provinces that have Amish. So we have, it's always Pennsylvania and Ohio, 1 or 2, 2 and 1, and then Indiana's third and Wisconsin's fourth. And we have about 30,000 Amish, and then there's probably 5 to 10,000 older Mennonites here, and smaller numbers of German Baptists who typically don't speak Pennsylvania Dutch. But and the vast majority of the plain people in Wisconsin are concentrated in the center and the western part. So they end up coming to Madison. And so several years ago, shortly after I came here, people would say, hey, could you like meet me at the hospital? I don't know whether they're, we're having some disagreements and, questions and that sort of thing. And then eventually the provider started contacting me. So I'm on, speed dial around the self of some key providers and key specialties where they're seeing a lot of plain patients, and one happens to be with burn care. And so I had gotten, I do lots and lots of outreach presentations for doctors and nurses. I do grand rounds presentations. I work with social workers. I work with hospital chaplaincy staff, and I got a call this morning from a social worker saying, hey, we've got a plain patient here, and mom and dad want to check her out this afternoon. They think she's ready to be discharged. The docs have a different opinion. Could you come over and help out? And that's what I did. So
did you ever imagine that this career in Pennsylvania Dutch would ever have taken you in that direction? That's unbelievable to hear. Right. Never. Yeah, you never would have thought that.
It's like when I was, being trained as a Germanic linguist, in graduate school, I was thinking it's like, okay, I'll do linguistics and that kind of thing. And, I love speaking Pennsylvania Dutch and, it all kind of, but as I always say, it's like, A leads to B leads to C. And now I'm at Q, but there was something between C and P.
Sure.
There's absolutely a connection there. So it's incredibly satisfying work. It's all volunteer. I don't get paid for any of this, but it's really, really satisfying because, these are people who, just are really, really grateful to have an advocate. And sure. It's not that plain people are perfect. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And another area that I've started working in just in the last couple of years has to do with problems of sexual abuse and domestic violence, which do occur. It's rare, but do occur in their communities, and helping the communities navigate these very, very tricky situations, working with social workers, with therapists and counselors, working with the sheriff's departments and investigators and the judicial system. There's just a very, very complex kind of mix of things that include language, faith, and culture, all kind of rolled up into one. And to be able to sort of have this kind of insider outsider perspective, I think is really, it's very rewarding. It's extremely rewarding.
It has to be. It has to be. Mark, our time is flying. I just want to close with just one final question for you, and that is, and this, maybe you get asked this a lot. I'm going to ask you to look into your Pennsylvania Dutch crystal ball. Where do you see the future of our language going 20 years out, farther? Your call. I'll let you answer that any way you want.
Well, the future is kind of the present, which is the absolute sort of thriving of the language among plain people. As long as there are going to be Amish and Old Order Mennonites, it's pretty safe to say there's going to be Pennsylvania Dutch. So I think that's, and they are the fastest growing group of human beings on the planet, right? So their language is now, the fastest growing, language on the planet, large or small. There are, similar languages. I mentioned Yiddish and how to write German, that sort of thing, and the growth rate is pretty much comparable, but nothing exceeds the growth rate of Pennsylvania Dutch. I think, look at the present, and I would say, my crystal ball would say, things seem to be really falling into place very, very nicely for the overall economic and spiritual health of the plain communities. And as long as they're around, Pennsylvania Dutch is going to be around.
Yeah.
So we're very fortunate.
Mark, I just want to thank you for the years and years and years of work that you've done in telling our story and in preserving our story. Your book is an absolute treasure. I've read it more than once, and I have recommended it to I don't know how many people. I just want to personally thank you on behalf of all of us Pennsylvania Dutchies here in Pennsylvania, to thank you for the work that you've done, and the work that you are continuing to do, and now this work that you're doing with these patients. I mean, what a gift from God that you are for that. Thank you so much. So I hope that I'd love to have you on the show again sometime. I'm sure we can have a lot of other topics we can find out to talk about. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, sharing your wealth of knowledge, and for telling our story and putting it into print. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Doug, and for all the work that you do. And, if we lived closer, I'd want to hang out with you.
That's
Get a cup of coffee and talk more about this kind of stuff.
absolutely. Sounds like I need to take a road trip to Wisconsin at some point.
Very
We'll have to
grateful
make
for all
that
the work
happen.
that you do to kind of advance the profile of the culture, and so thank you.
No, thank you, Mark. I will
Okay.
link Mark's book in the show notes for anybody that wants to purchase it. I'm telling you, make a great Christmas gift, everybody. But again, thank you, Dr. Louden. I look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
All right, take care.
Macht's gut.
Macht du's all gut.
Yeah. People, my goodness, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation half as much as what I did. Again, that book, if you are interested, is Pennsylvania Dutch, The Story of an American Language. It is available on on Facebook. No, on Amazon. You can purchase on Amazon. I'm sure there's other places that have it as well, but it is a treasure of a read. And as you heard, Mark's one of those great guys. You can tell. He pours his heart into everything that he does. So check that book out for sure. A couple things. Every month, I like to bring something in the Pennsylvania Dutch language. Real quick, this month I have a poem, a brand new poem. I'm gonna have a big announcement coming right after Thanksgiving. Follow along on our social media feed, of course. You're gonna find out. But here's a poem by a brand new Pennsylvania Dutch themed author, Michael Clay, born in 1982, lives in Virginia. And this is his poem, Eefachheit, or Simplicity. And I have the English down the right-hand side, which he wrote, and the Pennsylvania Dutch down the left-hand side, which I translated for him. Follow along in either language as I read the Pennsylvania Dutch. Want du kannst, die wilde Feckel heren, die wilde Sun zee, da wilde Wind viele, die wilde Blume rieche, es wilde Wasser schmacke, was mee vom Leven brauchst du. I think that's pretty good, don't you guys? Big announcement on Pennsylvania Dutch poetry coming out here after Thanksgiving. Tip of the hat for that one. Thank you, Michael. What a great poem. And every month we love to bring you music of some kind, Pennsylvania Dutch themed. And this month I would love to announce that we have the return of our good friends who used to be the Gustafson Weinsteiger family band. They have officially changed their name to the Shooflies. What a great name. And they are going to be the entertainment at the Oli Dahl Versammling this weekend. So if you're in Oli for the Versammling, you're going to see them live. They sent me a video saying, Doug, it's time for you to play another one of our songs. So without further ado, I need to pull in real quick, share my screen, and we're going to hear their song called Lauterbach, a famous Pennsylvania Dutch folk song. I'm going to pull myself out of the feed, and I want you guys to just enjoy.
1, 2, 3. Zur Lauterbach hab ich mein Strumpfel und ohne hab ich mein Schuhe fällt. Und ohne Schuh ich nicht nach Haus. Da steig ich dem Schuster zum Fenster hinein und hol mir ein Neuen raus.
In Lauterbach hab ich mein Herz und ohne Herz kann ich nicht leben. So gehen wir wieder nach Lauterbach, wo's Mädel, wo's jedes mir geben.
Bin alle mein Leben in Augen gewesen und bin auch zum Frauen zu jung. Hab immer die Bubere gerne gesehen und Rosi und Lenny genug.
If that doesn't bring a tear to your Dutchy eyes, I don't know what will. What a what a beautiful, beautiful rendition of the famous folk song Zum Lauterbach. Shooflies, you done good. Da hast arig gut gedo. Why, I can't wait. Now now you got to send us another one. You know that. Now next month I need a Christmas themed one, so get on that, okay, guys? No, in all seriousness, these people, this family has shown us nothing but love over the last couple of years and support of all that we've done. Good Lord. And then they give us stuff like this to help us enjoy the love that they have for our language and our culture. Wonderful, wonderful good, as we would say in Pennsylvania Dutch. Ay, ay, ay. Thank you so much, Shooflies. You are doing great work. Keep that music coming. Hey, we're getting towards the end here. You know, Christmas is coming. If you're not going to buy Mark Louden's book, which you should, if you're also looking for other types of Pennsylvania Dutch themed Christmas gifts or Hanukkah gifts or whatever, or just gifts because you want to buy a gift, check out our Zazzle shop, zazzle.com/PA-Dutch101, where you can get your own Pennsylvania Dutch themed stuff like an Out in the Light shirt or a Snickle Fritz shirt, along with many, many other things, as you can see from the people pictured here. Magnets, car magnets, magnets for on your refrigerator, stickers, t-shirts, hoodies, you name it. I got a new I Break for Hex signs sticker where you can put on the back of your car, a magnet. Ich bin Diet. You can get that stuff. There's tons. Check out all the stuff that's on the Zazzle shop. Again, it's zazzle.com/PA-Dutch101. Check it out, please. And if you like what we're doing and you'd like to financially support us, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Doug Maidenford, or you can become a monthly patron on our Patreon account. Just go to patreon.com/PA-Dutch101. And any of the money that's raised in those campaigns goes towards the upkeep of the channel. It puts gas in my Subaru so I can drive all over southeastern Pennsylvania and attend Pennsylvania Dutch events and bring that stuff back to you guys and put here on the channel. So Also, if you've never subscribed to the YouTube channel, I don't know better. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? I'd like to say a big gross dank for die Unterstützung. These are people that have financially supported us in the past and continue to support us. I just want to give them a quick shout out. Gary and Dina Weaver, Nathan Seeger, Seth Moak, Norman Jung, Shirley, Scott Vanek, Glenn Ritter, David Hunsinger, Dolly Moyer, Gary Johansson, Gail Spilsbury, Bill Nace, Susan Thomas, Tanya, Big Z2, Leoso, Lenora Holt, and Cayenne Janukowski. Please. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Thank you so much for your continued support. Friends, Dutchies, mark your calendars. Next month, our PA Dutch Live episode will be on Wednesday, December the 18th, the week before Christmas at 6 p.m. right here on the YouTube channel or over on our Facebook page. And next week, we welcome Dr. Karen Gunter onto the show. She is a professor of history at Mansfield University here in North Central Pennsylvania, and she will be telling us all about 18th century religion in the Ole Valley. Now, you might say, well, that sounds like a yawn fest made for it. Actually, if you remember our episode a couple months ago with Tom Stokes about the wonderfulness that is the Ole Valley, we're going to take a look specifically at some of the religious tensions that were taking place in the 1700s, unique to the Ole Valley. We're going to be talking about one of my direct relatives. I can't wait to have Karen on, and probably some of your direct relatives too. It's going to be a fascinating topic for everybody to join in. So please mark your calendars, December the 18th, 2024, for our last episode of the calendar year. But have no fear, dear friends. I got 2025 already. I got shows already booked and lined up for 2025. So we will be back in the new year. But until then, of course, we got the December show to go. I find it truly humbling that so many of you take time out of your busy lives to spend an hour with me every Wednesday, one Wednesday a month for this show. And I know a lot of you that maybe are watching this after it went live. I thank you too for supporting all that we do here at PA Dutch 101. For all of you that follow along on Instagram and on Facebook, and of course, follow the YouTube channel. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is the month of Thanksgiving and a time to truly think about all the things that we are thankful for. And I hope that all of you will take some time over the coming days to do that yourselves and not just think about it, but say it out loud. Say it out loud. What are you thankful for? And if it's somebody, tell them. That's my wish for all of you this week. If there's somebody that you're thankful for, find them, call them, text them, face to face, tell them that you're thankful for them. It's important. This time of year, we should be thinking about those things. We should be thinking about it all the time, of course, but this time of year especially. I also hope that your turkey won't be dry next week, that your potato filling will be delicious, that there'll be gravy flowing in all corners of your kitchen, and maybe some red beet eggs, a good spiked pumpkin pie, all the things that dried corn, all the good things that the Pennsylvania Dutch enjoy on Thanksgiving. Those things will all be on my table next Thursday. I hope that they are all on your table as well. And I hope that you can find and have that experience to truly think about what you're thankful for. And I wish all of you a very blessed Thanksgiving. And I can't wait to be with all of you next month in December. But until then, dear friends, keep practicing your Pennsylvania Dutch and, tell somebody that you're thankful for them. What else can we wish? I hope to see you 1 month from now when we're back. And until then, check out the stuff we're doing online on our social media and shoot me a message sometime. Info at PA Dutch 101. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday that's left, and happy Thanksgiving. Holliges Dankfest. And as we always say in Pennsylvania Dutch, Max gut, dear friends.
Max gut zu dir, Max gut zu dir, Max gut zu dir für now. Unsere Zeit ist all und so es ist, Max gut für now. Hoff wieder mit dir zu sein, hoff du bringst zurück ein Freund. Max gut zu dir, Max gut zu dir, Max gut zu dir für now. Unsere Zeit ist all und so es ist, Max gut für now. Hoff wieder mit dir zu sein, hoff du bringst zurück ein Freund. Und so Max gut, lieber Freund, Max gut.